Hi everyone, welcome to another Creative English Club meeting. Today we have Brooklyn with us, who is a creative strategist from New York City, and we're very excited to receive her here today. So let's get started. If it's your first time here with us on the Creative English Club, this is a safe space where we're just practicing our language skills while connecting with people from all over the globe. So not only from North America or from the United Kingdom, but from all over, considering that English is a language that just unites us, and it's something that allows us to connect with each other. So the activity is free. You just have to be a member of the Redhook Creative Community to be able to be a part of this, and always have the opportunity to be here and connect with whoever we have as a guest on that week. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started introducing our moderators for tonight. So first we have Via. Via is an amazing art director who I've had the pleasure of knowing for like some years now, and she always has like amazing works to present. And yeah, I'm going to let her take the mic on now.
Thanks a lot. It was really lovely, your introduction. Thanks, Mari. I'll introduce Rodriguinho, who is a copywriter for at Chill. He's currently living in São Paulo, and he enjoys sports, particularly soccer. He also appreciates classic films, especially horror films, and he also enjoys engaging in sports like running. So, welcome.
Thanks, Bia. It's a pleasure to talk with everyone here. And for starting, I will present Diego. Diego is a brand strategist, currently working for DDB Guatemala. He loves sports like me. He practices Muay Thai, and I don't know these words. It's complicated for pronounce it, but instead of this, he enjoy what Formula One during weekends, and tonight he participated with us. So I think it will be a great meeting. So thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to come back, and let's go.
Hey everyone, thank you, Rodrigo. And last but not least is Helena. Helena is a copywriter, and at the same time she's a content coordinator based in Sao Paulo. She loves dancing, watching cinema classics, and going to our exhibition. And also she's a proud tutor of two cats. So, Helena, nice to meet you.
Hi everyone. So I'm here once again, very proud of this community and these meetings. And now we have Mari, our guest, coming back again. Mari is living in Ottawa these days, and she is our hostess for tonight and all of our meetings. Please, Mari, come back.
Thanks, Elena. And now finally, we're introducing our guest for tonight, who, if you read the description and everything, you already know a little bit of her professional bio. Welcome, Brooklyn, and I'll let you introduce yourself before we get started with some questions.
Thank you, Mari. So my name is Brooklyn. I am a creative strategist working at David in both the New York and Miami office. I kind of work at a nice hybrid between them. I work currently on brands like Halls. I'm doing some Netflix projects. And oh gosh, now I'm forgetting all the things. Oh, and Pennington, which is a lawn and garden company, and a couple of other brands. Currently, I also have worked as a retail strategist at another agency. Or when I started out in my career, I worked as a retail strategist before moving over to creative strategy at my current agency. So just a little gist of what I do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And V is going to be the one to ask you our first question for tonight.
Hey, Brooklyn. Nice to meet you. So I will start the first question talking about a project that Mari talked before when we started. And I saw it on your LinkedIn and on your book that you made along with a designer and a copywriter. And you were honorable mention on the Young Sheets. And I have to say that seeing that project kind of like brought me a leap of faith in terms of like started working in advertising, because the project kind of like brings to light the relevance of having like diverse points of view. So that said, I would like to know more about like the process and more about the young shades too. Like, how was the process of like thinking about the project and creating for a market that actually don't see those different points of view very regularly?
Yeah, of course. So the project was for a Young Shits brief. If you're not familiar with Young Shits already, it's kind of like a student and early career open brief that gets hosted by a professional in the industry like every month. And so I was very early on in my career, and I started out in retail, and I did not want to be in retail. So I was trying to expand my portfolio, show that I can work with creatives on more creative work that had a higher conceptual level to it versus stuff with retail, which tends to be like a bit more straightforward and not as, fun as a lot of the things that you get in creative and brand strategy. And so I found that project, and I contacted a couple of friends of mine who are creatives, and I said, hey, do you want to work on this brief? Like, you two can be the creatives and the ones who are like fully like on the project submitting it, and I'll act as your strategist and help you guys develop this concept. And so the brief was, advertising as a career is something that a lot of us end up finding later on. So we don't hear about it until like we're late into college, or maybe we're a couple years in another career, and then we go into advertising. And it's not something like a doctor or a lawyer that you know as a kid or even in high school and you start preparing for very early on. And so the challenge was find a way to like help that pipeline of getting new younger people interested in advertising. And so we talked about it a lot. And one thing that kind of kept coming up was this theme of like, yes, there's a pipeline problem and just people knowing what advertising is. But there's also like a diversity issue in advertising as well, where like, yes, like for most people, it's something they figure out later. But then for people from diverse backgrounds, that's even more so common. And a lot of them don't hear about it for much, much later. Or they find out much later and then they're behind from other people who knew earlier and were able to prepare their books a lot sooner. And so that's what started out the idea and kind of the thinking and the conversations that we were happening together. Like, we shouldn't just create a pipeline to get people interested, but let's actually target this specific group of people where we have a pipeline problem already. Like, let's fix the pipeline problem, but then let's also help this industry that is sorely lacking in diversity. And so our concept was to essentially partner with kids who have been in juvenile detention. So they're people who are obviously already starting to think differently, like in another sense of the word. But people or kids in juvenile detention, we were watching all of these documentaries. So many of them had like these artistic like side hustles or these things that really like were passionate about, but weren't sure how to channel and to actually make into a career later. And so we're like, well, this kind of keeps coming up as a theme here. We do want to like open up like advertising to backgrounds that are non-traditional, people who wouldn't have thought about getting into advertising altogether. And so we decided that our concept was going to be to like partner with juvenile detention centers with certain agencies and like create pipeline programs directly through there where they could have like maybe a high school internship through there. And maybe they could get linked up with a mentor to talk about like their progress and what they're interested in all throughout college. And then we ended up getting an honorable mention. We didn't end up winning the whole thing. But I felt like compared to the people who did win, which I think they still did a good job, we were going for something maybe a bit more like pointed and unique, whereas they went a little bit broader and was just like, everyone should get interested in the advertising industry. So it was a fun project to work on. And overall, like it did eventually help me to like, I guess, get my book into a better shape so I could move to a creative agency later.
That's perfect. Thanks a lot.
Amazing. Thanks for the question, Via. And for everyone who's watching, if you want to just like check the project Everclean's page, I would highly recommend. It's clearly a project that like had a lot of purpose. So like you said, like even like with an honorable mention and not like the award itself, it's still like a project that like struck a point there. So yeah, I recommend everyone to check it out. So yeah, let's moving on to our next question. That's gonna be from Rodriguinho.
Hi, I am suspicious to talk about this subject because I am a huge fan from David, from every kind of work from David, especially in Brazil. Brazil, like in New York or Miami, in Brazil, in São Paulo, David produced so many different kind of great ideas, especially from Burger King here. And I have one question that I will split. First, I have to know about. I want to know about your job. Why you choose? How is for you work in the boldest and most creative agents in the world, in my opinion, because I am, that I said before, I am a huge fan. And on the other hand, I know in the United States the Lino Zora and Guilherme Pinheiro. I don't know if you have direct contact with them, but how is for you working with Brazilian people? It's different kind of creative. How is the mentality for American when you work with together Brazilian people?
All right. So to answer your first question, which was around like, how do I like working at David and what do I kind of see as the process here and maybe why they are a bit different. So I joined David about a year and a half ago. And it was really like a godsend for me. I was at a previous agency that I transitioned into creative strategy from. And then I moved over to David because I wasn't quite happy with the progress that I was making there. And David's just been so fun so far. Everyone is so hungry to make good creative work. It's all in service for the work. It is very, very creative led, and you don't get bogged down by, I would say, like when I've worked at more like corporate focused agencies, like over process. Like we have a looser process in the agency that still works and is not too chaotic. So it's been a really, really fun whirlwind working at both two David offices, essentially. I started working more in the Miami office initially and have started moving a little bit more into the New York office as it's getting more and more established. To your second question, I do work directly with Guy and Linus. And I would say that a good majority of my team in both the Miami and the New York office are Brazilian. And have moved over from Brazil, or sometimes we work with teams from the Sao Paulo office who kind of come in and do a project with us. And everyone's just so lovely. I mean, I don't think there's maybe a huge difference in how I would say American teams and Brazilian teams work, except that like I feel like Brazilian teams, I think, can sometimes be hungrier for creative work. Like maybe this is me getting more into the creative side of the industry, and I haven't had that too much at any other place. But like everyone who I've worked with is always looking for really good insights to find something to develop a cool creative idea in. And they're all really eager to find out what's something interesting they can do for the brands that we're working on, or sometimes more proactive work for a brand that we haven't even talked with. There's a very positive mentality and a very like good outlook of like, maybe this can happen, maybe it can work out, like why not? That I think sometimes we're a little bit more negative about in general and in business. So it's a really nice to be working with so many Brazilians in my office, and it's fun working with Guy and Linus. I work with them on a couple of projects.
Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Rodriguinho. And next up, Diego.
All right. Hi, Rodney. How are you? Look, in my case, I'm also a strategist. So, and I'm in those 2-3 years of strategy at the same time. But I know like during this process, there start appearing like words like brand strategies, income strategies, and creative strategy, and all the strategy ecosystems start changing. So I want to start with something basic, but at the same time, the part of the foundation of like, how do you, in your case, in David, like what's creative strategy or how they define it in the to know more about the role, and at the same time, I was seeing that you've been part of Leo Burnett, then Vice, David, and during my process of growing around winning strategy, there was a phrase that somebody told me was like, you always have to know how to steal knowledge from different agencies. So in your case, what you steal from each agency, or you're stealing right now from David, but that is helping you to be a better strategist.
So to answer your first one about titles, yes, titles can be a little weird in strategy, like especially when it comes to job hunting. Like I think the word strategist gets thrown around everywhere, and you really have to interrogate what does that company specifically mean by the word strategist when they're using it, because you can get really catfished, honestly, sometimes. So it's moving my name from I think I just had mine as a general strategist for a while, and I moved over to creative strategist because that actually signaled to creative agencies that I was their type of strategist, versus when I had just general one, like I would get like a bunch of weird companies reaching out to me saying like, oh, like you'd be a good fit because you generally do strategy, right? And I'm like, I mean, I guess some of the core principles are very similar, but like that's not the type of work that I'm attracted to. So I would like to stay over here, please. So I have started kind of going by creative strategist because it seems to be the lingo that a lot of creative agencies use for their strategists there. And then at David, how we kind of define creative strategists. I don't know if there's like a specific definition. What we do, I guess, is our role. I mean, besides just the obvious, like taking client briefs, adding in like a bit more charm and a bit more fun and a bit more direction to give to the creative team. Like we also, just like the creative teams, are encouraged to look for those proactive moments of opportunity in the brands that we own and that we work on consistently. We need to go and find those opportunities and share them with creatives and kind of say like, hey, like there could be something here. And if you create an idea for it, like there's a very easy way for us to get it sold into this client. Is an obvious opportunity that they're not capitalizing on. And I've had that happen a couple of times where like we, for some of the clients, will do like a monthly kind of free work session where we just bring ideas to them, like from the strategy team. We just say like, hey, like here are some trends that we've been finding that make sense for your category or relate to your category, or here's something interesting from the audience that you typically try to recruit from. And I've found that can be a really good way to like prime them for proactive ideas. And so finding moments there of opportunity and showing them over to the creatives, we can kind of work as a really good team to find ways to sell in those proactive ideas to client. That's kind of how it works. It's not like a specific definition. It's just, here's what I do. And then things that I've stolen from the agencies that I've been at. Leo, I worked with at as an intern. And that I think really gave me a good foundation of like what a strategist is and the types of things that really are integral to being a good strategist, like simplicity. I think Leo especially like really prioritized simplicity in their strategy. And I think that's always something that I've really appreciated about like their strategic practice, and something that like I do try to emulate in other places. Even though every place does say like, oh, simplicity, like I felt like their brief style like really like went very far in that way, because when I was there, they worked with a very get to buy simple brief, and that was it. And I know other agencies use that too, but that's where I was first introduced to it, was there. And then when I did retail, I think I just kind of learned a little bit more of that like comms and how like the messaging really becomes so different when you change channels, and how like you can kind of flex that in different places. At Virtue and Vice, or at Virtue, which is a company by Vice that I worked with for a little bit, I learned about the flexibility of working on project-based clients, and really having those like one-off opportunities. Like, it's not this long-term brand building that you get with an agency of record type client. You have this one-off, and you have to really interrogate the brief in a different way when you're thinking about it as a project that maybe could become other projects if they like you, or maybe it's just that one-off. And it's just a really good opportunity. And being on something that's project-based allows you to go and investigate a lot of different categories at one time, because you're not just sectioned off to one client all the time. And then at David, now that I am on more of those long-term clients, I feel like I've been getting better at that longer-term brand building and that longer-term thinking, doing better with building longer-term client relationships. Like I said, with those trend reports that we do with some of our clients, like I feel like that's allowed me to think about that longer-term strategy a bit more.
Thank you.
Those were great questions. Thank you, Diego. And I'm going to follow you up with that with like a similar question to like what we were talking about, since you mentioned a lot about like trends and how that helps you develop like strategies with your clients, or like spot opportunities that you wouldn't, that maybe like even the creative team you wouldn't have otherwise. Do you have any tips or advice on how to keep up with trends? Is it very like industry as like oriented in your like point of view, or is it more of like a global setting, sort of like keeping up with trends? Like what works best for you?
I think what has worked best for me is limiting how much information I take in, because as a strategist, you really want to read everything, kind of go through that process when you get a brief of looking at every single thing that relates to the subject of the brief that you're working on. And I think especially now in the age of like TikTok, it becomes really, really easy to just keep gorging yourself on information. But then it gets to a certain point where like there's so much you cannot focus. And so I think learning to limit yourself on what you're going to be looking at. Like I've deleted TikTok from my phone, for instance, because I was just like, this is giving me way too much information all the time. And a lot of these things are actually just micro trends and they're not big trends. Is helped me to like be able to slow myself down and think about what I'm reading a bit more deeply. And you can find something interesting usually when you do that, versus consuming so much that your mind starts to race and you can't easily make those deeper connections that lead you to like a cool insight or something cool that's interesting for a client as easily.
That's a great perspective. Thanks for sharing that. And next up, Elena, can you ask your question?
Yes, it fits a lot with what you're saying, and because about the you're saying just about limiting some kind. There's a lot of information that we have, but how to be a more creative strategist? What do you do to be a more creative strategist? Because I saw your flip the turf case for Pennington Seed, and I found it awesome and amazing how you got this creative work for this client, which is it must be more difficult than to have a creative case than for Burger King or Netflix, you know. But how and also I can imagine that it might have a lot of strategic work on the background. So how do you get to this more creative strategic work?
So I think one thing is exactly what you're saying. You spend more time with the client and kind of hear like what gets them interested in an idea and what can get them actually like primed to get an idea from you guys and start trusting you with maybe something that they're unfamiliar with, for instance. I don't think that was necessarily the case on this specific example, but just in general. And then the other thing that I think has really helped me be more creative and understand like what feels really unique in advertising when there's so much stuff being produced is just working with creatives. Like I think one of the best parts of my job and something that I look forward to most is working with the creative teams that are at my agency. And I think that helps me more than anything become more creative and see their perspective of like, hey, this is a good idea. This is something that gets me as a creative excited. These are the insights that I gravitate towards. And we have like a proactive meeting at the agency that happens like every other week. And creatives there will like pitch their ideas that they want to pitch to regular clients. And we've started allowing some of the strategists to come in and say like, hey, here are opportunities for maybe the next proactive meeting that we can have. And you guys can all bring ideas around that. And I think getting more and more involved in meetings like that has really helped me to have a better dialogue with creatives and understand, I don't know, a bit better like their creative minds and how to make myself a bit more creative too.
Yes, to have this bond connecting fully. So also you have the best of their work and they have the best of your work together. So
yeah, exactly.
good. Thank you.
Nice. Thanks for the question, and I think that's very interesting because that's the first thing that I noticed about your like title. Like we talked a little bit about your title before, but it's like when we usually hear the word strategist, we usually think of like, you know, like very separated from the creative like side. It's like the person who's supposed to be like the foot down, like to be like, oh, like this is what, you know, we're supposed to be looking at. These are like the numbers and the trends and everything. So to be like a creative like strategist, that's like so interesting because like there's no reason why the strategy shouldn't be aligned with creativity, right? So I think that it's like so cool that you like saw that in yourself. It's like an opportunity for you to like grow as a professional and just like switch over to that side. And I'm like, you clearly seem to be enjoying it. So yeah, that's very great. Yeah, and I'm gonna follow you up with another question of my own that just came up. I saw like one of the brands that you worked at some point was TD Place. Am I right in that? Or no? Maybe just like the agency works with them.
TD Bank.
Yes.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing too specific, but at least in Canada, they seem to be like one of the main sponsors for everything like Pride related. And we talked a little bit about diversity like before as well. So how does that like, you know, all the conversation about diversity and equity come into like your day-to-day job? Like, is it something you as a strategist feel like the need to bring up in certain strategies, or is it something more like company oriented? Just curious to hear more about that.
It can be a little bit of both. I feel like I've noticed, and more as an industry-wide thing, not necessarily like at David, that the past couple of years, maybe the focus has gone a little bit farther away from that, like as like the metaverse and AI has been a larger and larger focus, although like it does come up like, hey, like those things actually kind of kill diversity. The actual focus on briefs being near those topics, I've noticed, I feel like I've seen the industry kind of shift away from that a little bit. And that I think just highlights the importance, like as strategists, as creatives, to kind of bring that up as topics in briefs. It's something that like I do try to think about if it is relevant, especially to a certain brief, like if it could bring in a really good angle to like highlight a certain audience or otherwise. I try and bring up those moments. It also kind of depends on the appetite of the client itself, because I think some clients, because there's been so many conversations on like diversity and like sensitive topics around diversity, not just, you know, bring more people in. that like some of them can be hesitant to talk on anything about it because they're worried about saying something wrong. And so I think a lot of that job, beyond just like, hey, bringing it up as an idea, bringing up those perspectives as maybe an avenue we could go down, is getting the client comfortable with having those conversations, and getting them comfortable with doing ideas that are around those topics.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't even think like the direct connection between like that leaving the spotlight and AI coming into the spotlight, but that makes a lot of sense. And then like follow-up question, I guess, has like the whole conversation about like AI interfere with your work? I know like it's been interfering with a lot of industries because, you know, some like times like from the person who's paying for the workforce perspective, it's like, why would I be paying that much considering it's something that maybe we can like just get like, you know, a platform online to do it. Have you encountered any problems with that, or is it something that's still like very much just like around the industry so far?
Yeah, I think it's something that we're all trying to figure out. I think right now, like at our office, we've had some use cases with AI where like you can use AI to like very quickly like put together a mock-up for something, for instance, where it's hard to find like a photo reference of something. And so you use AI to generate it instead. And now that art director doesn't have to spend hours looking for a reference like that. So you have those nice time savers there. But I think as with anything, like when the metaverse happened, you got so many of those like lazier ideas of just company X, but in the metaverse. I think that started to happen and then sort of slowed down for AI, where we're all just trying to figure out like, okay, like how do we use this in our daily work? How does it help us? How does it hinder us? Where does it actually expand creativity? Where does it kind of just rehash things and not really provide any new perspective at all? So I think we're all just figuring it out. It's very early on, and it's hard to kind of master these things quickly.
Definitely. And I know Bia has another question, so I'm gonna let her take the mic on now.
Yes, I have. So Elena already talked about, but one of the jobs that you worked in, David, was the second year of the Pennington #FlipTheTurf campaign. And I was kind of like curious about, because I know that previously David wasn't on the first year of the campaign. So I was kind of like curious about how was the process of like continue the issue of the campaign, which is kind of like really important because you were talking about like a super sport that everyone watches, and how was the process of like continuing without like saying the same thing of the first year, and how was the process of like picking Von Miller and structuring the strategy of the campaign? That's it.
Yeah, I'll give context for everyone on what that campaign was real quick. So Pennington is a lawn company. They sell grass seed. And their first year of Flip the Turf was focused on this idea that a lot of football stadiums, they use artificial grass. And artificial grass has been linked to like higher injury rates in athletes when they play on those surfaces. Like the surface is just harder. It ends up actually catching onto their shoes a lot more, and can cause them like non-contact injuries where like they haven't even been tackled by another player, and like they're still coming away with like a torn ACL. So it's a very big issue, and more stadiums in the US are switching over to turf, artificial turf, because it's a money saver. Like they don't have to take care of the grass. And it's kind of this contentious thing because the NFL is constantly being reprimanded because of player safety. You have these people who are literally getting tackled by 200-pound men nearby them, who are running full speed. And obviously that causes really big injury rates. And they always say, hey, we're focused on player safety. But then at the same time, they decide to switch off something like real grass for artificial turf because it'll save them some money, even though they make millions of dollars. So the first year that they did it, they did a very like simple video campaign where it was just all these statistics flying over the screen. And it ended up really taking off because in the Super Bowl that was played on artificial turf, a very key player got an injury caused by turf and was out for the rest of the game. And it was a very high profile moment where everyone was like, oh shit. And it brought up this contentious argument back into the sports world right then and there. So they kind of had that lightning in a bottle moment where they did something like fairly basic, like a video to show all the stats and everything. And then it was everywhere because it just suddenly became such a hot topic. And so for year 2, they wanted us to do something that could also get a lot of people talking, but we weren't going to have something like that happen again. Like, one, we didn't really hope for someone to get injured. So like, you know, you're not trying to bank on that happening. But then at the same time, like, it wasn't going to happen anyways because the Super Bowl was being played on real grass the year that we were going to be in. And so we filtered through a lot of ideas. There are a lot of different tension points in it. And so what we ultimately decided to do to kind of just capture that moment was to partner with a player and get them to speak out, because actually getting them to speak out is really, really big because they're still being paid by the NFL and yet they're speaking out against them. And so we put this ad together with this football player who was a very big advocate against artificial turf. And then we were going to run it during the draft, which is when you pick the new players for the next year. And the NFL essentially told us, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. And so it got banned. And we weren't allowed to play it on any sports networks. And so we kind of had to go into a guerrilla style campaign where we paid the player that like we partnered with to like post it on his story. And we paid like a couple of other like media vendors to kind of run the story a little bit. And then it just got like naturally a lot of traction. Like a lot of football players are really big advocates for this thing. So a lot of them were reposting it and it became a big conversation again, albeit not as big as last year when they had that crazy moment, but it was like a really big conversation. And although like NFL is never going to acknowledge us, later in the year, the player that we partnered with, his team decided to switch over to real grass. So it was kind of like this really big win for us too, because yes, they're not going to say, oh, Pennington, you made us change our mind. But the fact that this was the team that we partnered with the most players with to speak out against this issue, and they switched over to grass was a really big victory for us.
It's kind of like proves the point of the whole campaign, right? It's kind of like, okay, we partnered with the main player of your team, so yeah, and you change from turf to real grass.
Exactly.
Which is kind of awesome, actually, because I was kind of like watching the case and kind of like thinking about like, oh my God, I probably wouldn't reach that insight like ever. But yeah, this is kind of like really nice. And I think that one of the things that Linus already told me is that if you actually like involve something about like lawsuits and things like that, probably your idea is like a big one or a great one. And talking about like that, because you already said about the connection between the strategists and the creative team. I actually talked with a lot of creatives, like art directors and copywriters, and it's kind of like a pain for us because we actually know that data and insights, they like don't came out of the blue. Like we have to research, but sometimes we don't actually have like time or actually like deadlines to actually research for those things. And I already talked about like with a bunch of creatives that sometimes the answer is like talking with the strategic team. But I don't know, like I feel that in all the agencies that I worked for, this connection and this bond between strategy and creatives, they actually don't, it isn't real, you know? So I was going to ask you if you have like little tips for those bounds to be made, and actually like for us as creatives to actually research and actually talk more with the strategic ones so that we can enrich our ideas.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. I mean, it's a common complaint from creatives that like strategists are kind of there and they're doing the rest of the work. And I think it really depends on like the dynamic between the strategy and the creative department. Like sometimes those two departments are consciously trying to make connections together and work with each other. And then sometimes they're not, and they're just acting as two independent departments. And I think it really goes both ways from strategy and creative. I think it's maybe the strategist job to reach out a bit first because we've gotten the reputation for being a little useless. I always try and like bring things up to my creative teams to see if anything would be useful, or reach out to them while they are ideating to see if I can help them with anything. I think similarly, like I always get really, really excited when like a creative like reaches out to me and is like, hey, like this is just a thought. Like it's not even an idea yet, but like I just need someone to talk to about it. And like, could we just dish for like 30 minutes and talk about this and maybe see if we can shape it into anything. So I think it kind of is working both ways a little bit. Like you as a strategist have to like set up the foundation with a good brief that's interesting, that gets the creatives to trust you and want to hear your opinion. And then creatives, like if you do see like a strategist maybe making that effort, like reach out to them and they'll probably be more than happy to start forging those relationships between the two departments. Like, I know that like it's not every single strategist, but if you get that rare one, like it will make their day to have and start making those relationships with the creatives. And it'll only get better if the two of you start working together to try and like make ideas better, to make the teams work better, and just partner up a little bit more.
Yeah, totally agree.
In my case, I have a problem nowadays. I can't work without the strategic planning before. So please put it in my lap so I can take a look at it and then I create it.
Really, I have an extra question. A little bit curious about the process. I think we have been talking about result and like awesome like advertising pieces, but at the same time, I want to know, like, in your case, we know like a strategy work with different frameworks, tools, or even we create methodology, or like just just try to put everything together to for the puzzle to work. In your case, like, what do you think, or based on your experience, like, what you like to mix or to work with? What that's the best methodology for you that you think like, when I use this and this, I think like great stuff happen, or for this project, I like when I mix those three. I don't know, research and like interviews, and like, I don't know, use another tool or artificial intelligence, something like. How do you like to work, and what do you think? What type of methodology putting all together give you like best results?
Yeah, I would say like currently at David, we're not super framework heavy, I would say, like especially in the strategy department. I think I've kind of made some shortcuts for myself by like kind of staying a little bit into my like my own kind of framework or a simple brief structure that I can kind of refer back to and kind of help organize my thinking in. But I think for me, I try and keep there's like a process that I have when I start on a project that I typically try to stay to. And I guess that's kind of my own framework in a way. Like, I guess referencing to earlier, like when I start on a project, like I do try and like see like, okay, what's all the information I can kind of get on this, like within reason, and see if you can find like those moments of tension in that research. So like if, I don't know, you see overwhelmingly that an audience is saying that they like XYZ thing, but then they're doing the opposite, like kind of investigating that a little bit more, doing some social listening to see like what people are talking about more like casually versus in just a very strict research setting, which you can kind of get some of those artificial answers there. And then kind of taking that moment to organize everything, seeing how things connect if you just kind of take a step back and look at it as a bigger picture. And then from there, figuring out like, okay, what are the cool angles that come out of that, and what can just kind of become thought starters or extra things for the creatives in like the appendix if they feel like looking at that. So not really framework heavy, but that's kind of my process, is just kind of very simple, like gorge of research, and then kind of paring it down over time.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, everyone, and thanks for picking things up while I fell out of the call. If you see that my computer is moving, it's because I came to the living room for better connection, and my cat keeps like bonking the computer. Like she's an orange cat, and she's very aggressive with her love. So the computer will keep moving.
You have to show the cat now.
Oh, I know that this is her. She's actually my roommate's cat, but I just consider her mine because, well, we live together. So, yeah. Well, another question for you, Brooklyn, like considering the creativity aspect of your role, I know that a lot of creatives, like they're often asked about their references and what they take on, like from their like everyday life, not necessarily from like seeing other ad campaigns, but like just what they consume, like on their personal lives and take it into their job. Do you feel like that applies to your role? Like, is there something on a personal level that you feel like helps with your creativity and or just like in general with what you do?
I think it just always helps to have outside interests for references, to find examples for things, etc. Not that everything you do outside of work needs to be in service of work, but like it does help. I, for instance, like have had a bunch of things that I can bring in from just the fact that I like gaming. And I can bring in some of those insights into things, especially as in the past couple of years, companies have gotten really obsessed about doing things in gaming, for instance. So things like that, things in movies, for example, I feel like that always is a really good way of making a point. If you can find that like a certain topic is being talked about in multiple movies or TV shows, that's probably saying something about the general vibe of the world right now. For instance, and I think a lot of people have referenced this is not a novel thought, but like there's a very eat the rich sort of mentality right now. And you can see that reference in Triangle of Sadness, Glass Onion, Parasite coming out a couple of years ago. So like having those kind of big cultural references that you can pull from and kind of show like, hey, like this is a larger conversation that we're all having right now. And these are the things that we're gravitating towards and we're talking about in culture. Like, I think that is always a really good toolbox to have.
Awesome. And we also got a question from the comments from Bruna. No one has read the question out loud yet, right? Just checking in. Okay, perfect. So she asked you, what was the most challenging job that you had to develop a creative strategy?
Okay, so the most challenging job for sure was I worked a couple of projects on Planned Parenthood. And if you don't have the context of what that is, it's in the US. It is it's mainly, I mean, it's for a lot of things, but it's mainly known and kind of politicized as an abortion care place. And I had to work on that during the time where we were losing access to that right in the US. And it was just a mental challenge. Like I was just sad, and it was a really like depressing project to work on. And I feel like I realized in that moment that like some people are really built to work on these kind of like big nonprofit topics that like are constantly dealing in heavy conversations, but that's not me. And I can't do that. And I like working on fun little meaningless brands that aren't talking about these big things sometimes. And so I think that was the hardest, just from like a mental challenge standpoint. Like I think it was ultimately rewarding to work on. But I needed a break afterwards because you dealt with such large topics, and it was something that was so like in your face during that time too, because it was just before we lost the right in the US. And so you're just staring down the barrel of like, oh, this is gonna happen. We all know it's going to happen, but like you still have to like create something that's going to talk about that topic and maybe try and get support against that happening. So it was just hard.
Yeah, I cannot even imagine that. And like, props to you for like working on the project. I can imagine like the mental toll it took. And just like I said, like I feel like self-awareness is something like so important, right? Because like oftentimes like, you know, everyone I think like has question like, oh, do I need to work with something like with like a higher purpose, you know? But like, if we think like that, like everything like has an importance, you know, in our everyday life. So yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective as well. I feel like it's very interesting, like even, you know, for people still questioning what they need to work on. And talking about like people still questioning, do you have any advice for people who are still early on in their careers and are considering being strategists or just considering going into ads in general?
Advice. Well, I guess the first thing is just that it's a hard industry to break into. So like not beating yourself up if it doesn't work out immediately. And I think especially for strategy, because we tend to be more top heavy. There are people with like agencies want to hire more directors than they want to hire junior strategists. Like they don't want to train us and they don't want to bring in juniors anywhere. So it's really hard to find an intro job in strategy. So I think I beat myself up a lot about this when I was first getting in, and that I didn't have the perfect journey to getting into like a creative strategist role or working at a creative agency. But just know that like it's about the persistence and it's about like continuously trying to kind of course correct and get to the place that you want to go. And it's not going to be perfect. And it usually isn't for most people. I think especially for strategy, a lot of us start an account first and then we move over into strategy later. So it's natural, and it's natural to feel shitty about that too. Like when I was in retail initially, like I think I even had a lot of people tell me that like it was basically hopeless if I just was going to like move spontaneously into creative or brand strategy. Like I was going to people for advice and they were like, yeah, actually you should go to, we have this school in the US called VCU. And they're like, you should go there and spend $100,000 getting a 2-year degree at this place. And then you can probably get into a creative agency. And I was like, that's neat. And some people can do that. I already have work experience. I already interned at Leo Burnett. I know that I can get an intro job somewhere at a creative agency. And the fact that I worked in retail shouldn't mean that that doesn't happen. So consciously being persistent, finding the people who are going to advocate for you and keep trying at it, even if you're trying to do it in the middle of a pandemic. Just keeping at it. And it can be hard, but like no one's journey is perfect and yours probably won't be either. So stop trying to make it perfect.
That's amazing advice. You did like great. That was I feel like, very inspiring. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I just like to open like the floor for mods here again. Like if anyone has any like last questions while we're wrapping things up. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, so before we like officially wrap it up, we just have like a section of our meetings here where I just bring along like some expressions or words that we've used during conversation that might be worth taking a second glance at. Just since it's a learning space, I'm not like an English teacher or professor or anything of the sort, but it's just like sharing together and learning together. That's the objective here. So just gonna be sharing my screen. Perfect. So first word here, it's comes from like the project we were talking about, from the, you know, like just like the breakers of rules and everything that we were like discussing when you were talking about the project of yours. So deviant, it's someone who deviates from rules or like standards. So it's just someone like out of the line. Being biased. So I'm unsure like where we use that in the context of this conversation, but being biased basically means just having a side. I feel like this is especially used on like a starting point of like an argument, like when you're like just making it clear that you're biased on a subject and you might just like be saying things because you already have a side in the topic or conversation. But just making it explicit that due to your background or your personal preferences, you might lean towards one opinion or the other. Creative led, I feel like the translation here is very simple to like understand, but I just wanted to highlight that because one of the things that I personally enjoy about the English language is that everything can be like turned into an adjective, or like words are very like moldable in a sense where you can just like put them together in very informal ways and create, like, as you see here, like an adjective. So creative led is just where like a space where creativity leads, for example, it's led by creativity, but you can say it in this way, like in verse. So whirlwind. By the way, Brooklyn, you have like amazing vocabulary. We're just like saying so many words that you don't normally see like in a like very informal context, but I just love to see it. And whirlwind, it's like similar to a tornado. Like if you're just saying you got caught in a whirlwind of like projects or something, like you just mean like, you know, everything was just like a little bit overwhelming or just like messy in some way. So it can have a lot of like uses, but that's basically what it means. Catfishing, I think if you've been online like long enough, it's a term that's hard not to come by. But it just means having like a fake or like more attractive facade. So something that seems more appealing than it actually is. And it's like catfishing you to have interest when maybe like if it were to be transparent, you wouldn't have that interest. Qualms, so just like uneasy feelings or like insecurities towards something. If you have qualms in regards to making a decision, you might just like have a little like, you know, like doubts on making the decision, just like uneasiness. One-off, again, the translation is very simple, but I just thought it was worth highlighting because it's something that we can all use in conversation. So a one-off, it's like out of the norm. It's something that's going to happen not necessarily like once, because it depends on the context. You're not talking about quantity of like, you know, events, but just like something that doesn't have a continuation, something that's not a standard, that's not a norm. Yeah, and I think that's it. Just like some expressions. And now I'd just like to open the floor for Brooklyn again to leave like a final message for everyone, for all the young creatives and strategies and everyone here just watching. And thank you again so much for sharing a little bit of your career with us. It was a very insightful conversation, and we'd love to have you here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I think my parting words were my last answer over there. Like, don't beat yourself up if your career isn't perfect. Just be persistent. So hope you guys got something out of this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if everyone wants to like start following like Brooklyn's career as well and her projects, like her socials are connected to the description of this transmission. So don't hesitate to make those connections happen beyond this talk. And thanks again for all our moderators here. Again, if you just want to be part of this conversations, it's simple as being like part of the Redhook Creative Community. These activities are very like flexible. You just have to have a level of English you feel comfortable in talking. It doesn't have to be perfect. It should not be perfect, because our objective here is to learn with each other. So don't be scared. Just come join us and be part of the conversation. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Brooklyn, so much for joining us. I'll see you all next time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so inspiring.